Rolling? Good morning, everybody. I am Carlo Versano, and this is the 1600 from Newsweek headquarters here at the top of the World Trade Center in New York City. I'm coming on the air today to try and make a little bit of sense of what has been a pretty remarkable 10 days to 2 weeks here in America. Make no mistake, right? The assassination of Charlie Kirk, the preeminent youth voice on the right, a devoted ally of President Trump, is a watershed event in our political history in this moment. In a little bit, I'm going to be talking with Newsweek's Mandy Taheri. She's our reporter who was at the Kirk Memorial in Arizona this weekend. But first, my thoughts on where we stand as a nation on this last day of summer 2025. I wrote in the newsletter last week. By the way, that newsletter you can sign up for by using this link below. I wrote in that newsletter that the day after Kirk was shot, there were some parallels to 9/11. Now, I got some reaction from that, a little bit of pushback from readers who called me various names. But unfortunately, it's proving to be more accurate by the day. And I don't mean that these events are similar in their magnitude, right? Of course not. I'm sitting here, at the literal site of the World Trade Center collapse. But the fallout from and the reaction to this gruesome and horrific murder of Kirk, which millions of us watched in almost real time on our phones, is reminding me of what happened right here where I'm sitting 24 years ago. Back then, it was White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer working for George W. Bush. He famously told Americans to, quote, watch what they say if they wanted to be allies in this brand new war on terror the government was about to wage. People who questioned the government's response to that attack, they lost their jobs. And this was before social media accelerated that trend. Bill Maher famously made the point, insensitive but not entirely untrue, that the hijackers were evil but also courageous in a way. Now, he lost his show for those comments. The man who replaced him, Jimmy Kimmel. Now Kimmel finds himself in a similar situation, ABC yanking their late-night host last week in response to comments he made in the wake of Kirk's killing.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Now, if ABC had chosen to pull Kimmel just over those comments, which were both insensitive and also factually inaccurate, remember that on Monday, we had a pretty good sense from the governor of Utah that the suspect in this case was coming from a place of leftist ideology rather than the right. Now, that would have been one thing. But the story is more complicated, and it's more complicated because of what Trump's handpicked FCC chief, Brendan Carr, said just hours earlier.
I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
Now, Trump supporters in MAGA world will say that this is no different from the Biden administration trying to censor social platforms on things like COVID and the 2020 election. And there's a kernel of truth to that. They really did try to do that back then. But Trump, of course, taking it to the extreme, as he tends to do. The other difference is how this administration has sort of proven itself to be chilling speech before the fact. Networks have been preemptively canceling shows that they think could offend the White House, like Stephen Colbert, even though that's not why they say they fired him. They're also choosing to settle frivolous lawsuits from the administration rather than fight and win them in court. All of this portends a dark moment for our country and its deeply held principle of free speech. But I think it's worth taking a moment to do a little bit of a refresher on some of these free speech terms and concepts that are being thrown about. The first is hate speech. Now, most hate speech is constitutionally protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has upheld this as recently as 2017. There's some limited exceptions to this, right? There's the famous yelling fire in a crowded theater. There's also any instance where the speech would cross the line into inciting imminent violence. But in America, we protect the right of people to say pretty much anything they want, hateful as it may be, at least from government action, from government retribution. That appears to be news to our Attorney General, who said this last week.
There's free speech, and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Now, she walked that back somewhat, but it's worth emphasizing that the First Amendment protects people from the government, right? Your employer can fire you for something you say. If you're an at-will employee, you don't really have many rights, and the Constitution doesn't really protect you. Private employers like ABC, they can make their own rules. But it's the FCC chief's involvement in jawboning ABC with those threats. That's what makes this thing so worrisome to those of us who really do believe in broad protections for speech. What is jawboning? It's another one of these speech concepts we're hearing a lot right now. To be clear, in that clip we showed, Carr did not take direct action against ABC for what Kimmel said. But he sure implied such action should be coming. The thing he said about we could do this the easy way or the hard way, I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a threat where I come from, right? But that's really what jawboning is, at least in the language of jurisprudence that we're talking about. There was a case about this just last year. It went to the Supreme Court. The NRA sued a New York State official for allegedly pressuring the banking industry in New York to stop doing business with the gun rights group. Now, again, that went all the way to the Supremes. They ruled unanimously in favor of the NRA. And it was none other than liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor who wrote the opinion in that case. She basically said that that official did indeed attempt to coerce a private party into suppressing views that the government disfavors in violation of the NRA's First Amendment rights. Again, unanimous, 9-0 decision, even all of the liberal justices ruling in favor of the NRA. That is what the speech protections in this country are supposed to be about. Now, the bottom line here is the court has routinely ruled that government officials can criticize speech all they want, right? Trump does it all day long, and he's totally within his rights to do so. They cannot use the power of the state in an attempt to suppress that speech. Now, I'm not a constitutional law lawyer. I took constitutional law once back in college, but I would suspect that Kimmel has a pretty good case that he was jawboned out of his job last week. Of course, the person who probably said this best was none other than Charlie Kirk himself, who tweeted last year, quote, "Hate speech does not legally exist in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free," end quote. Hear, hear. Okay, I want to go now to the conversation that I had with Mandy Taheri on Sunday from State Farm Arena in Phoenix, Arizona. She was there for the memorial to Charlie Kirk. Okay, so Mandy, tell us a little bit about what you just witnessed, who was there, and what they spoke about.
I would say in the beginning, it was a very, very energized group. Everyone was it wasn't a very solemn vibe at first. A lot of people are mourning Kirk's passing, but a lot of people were also really energized about what this means for the movement, for Turning Point, for conservatism, and very, very deeply rooted in faith. There were a lot of politicians, and there were also a lot of faith leaders, and there were merging through lines of those two themes throughout all of the speeches, of course. And Erica's was really the one that sort of hit more of the emotional, sort of like the actual like tribute to Charlie.
Yeah, that was the centerpiece of the show, yeah.
Totally. The other ones really focus more on sort of like his accomplishments in terms of like what he's achieved for Turning Point and conservatism and this youth movement. But she really touched on more of like a fuller picture of him. And really, she was the one that brought the crowd more to tears.
Well, I was going to say, it's pretty obvious that the speech that Erica, the eulogy, I guess you'd say, that Erica gave of her husband was, I mean, from watching it on the computer, it was really moving. It was really quite beautiful. Did you get that sense even more so when you were in the building?
Totally. Yeah, we were talking. A lot of people were moved by that. It would be really hard not to be, honestly. I think it was also particularly touching because it was such a different tenure than any of the other speeches. A lot of them were really a bit more political or a bit more just like sort of hitting home certain talking points. And hers was really more the intimate and emotional side. And it's really hard not to feel moved when a widow is, speaking about that, and she has two children. And also the most striking moment was when she forgave his assassin.
My husband, Charlie, he wanted to save young men, just like the one who took his life.
Yeah, I mean, I actually took my breath away. I mean, obviously, forgiveness is a huge tenet of Christianity, but for this woman who just had her life shattered like 10 days ago, to go on that stage and say that she forgave the man who allegedly did this to her husband was like unbelievable.
And you almost she felt it was unbelievable at some point, because she sort of steps back and like it sort of hits her like what she said and what everyone's receiving, and she's brought to tears from it. So that was like a very striking moment. There was a lot also about family in general.
Yeah.
That was throughout almost all the speeches. They almost all touched on what it means to be a good husband, what it means to be a good wife, what it means to be like a faithful relationship, and what does mother and fatherhood look like.
I had the same thought, and I was going to ask you, was that because the through line to me, it wasn't actually political. It was this point of these very traditional, but these family roles that both he and his wife, believed in very much, and obviously was a huge part of their life together. So, I mean, does that seem like it was a through line of sort of the people that you spoke to?
100% a through line of both the programming and the people I spoke to. Most of the people we talked to really mentioned how like they were excited to be there because there's an aspect of worship here. And that is an aspect they don't really get in a lot of other public realms. So that came through crystal clear. And just even in the signage, a lot had to do with, Charlie's relationship to God, why God chose Charlie, he was sacrificed. A lot of, actually, one person I spoke to was, which Erica touched on as well, is that Charlie, his life didn't end too early. He was like ordained by God to live to 31. And so he was neither early nor late.
Okay, well, to go from existentialism to my next political question. So the political news out of this event today, I suppose, is that Trump and Elon appear to have buried the hatchet. So there was the TV cameras were able to show Musk in the president's box. They shook hands. Trump kind of slapped his back. So it sounds like they're back on, or at least they've repaired the damage to their relationship. You get any sense of that from inside? Could you see anything?
No, we really couldn't. They were behind a glass barrier that was also horribly glared. So we could see when they were moving, but we couldn't see them actually interacting. And almost no one talked about Elon. I met one guy who works at a Tesla factory in Texas, and his commentary was about sort of like the genius behind Tesla and had nothing to do with Musk. He said nothing changed when Musk was part of the Department of Government Efficiency. Like he was just, that was a separate thing. So it didn't even feel like there were Musk sort of like super fans among us.
And then I guess, I mean, I don't know. The Tucker Carlson speech, I mean, I worry about this man a little bit, Mandy. I mean, he appeared to blame the Jews for Kirk's death. I don't know if you caught that, if that was sort of caught in the room there. But yeah, definitely I thought that's sort of the low light of the program.
So it's about 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, and Jesus shows up and he starts talking about the people in power, and he starts doing the worst thing that you can do, which is telling the truth about people, and they hate it, and they just go bonkers. They hate it, and they become obsessed with making him stop. This guy's got to stop talking. We've got to shut this guy up. And I can just sort of picture the scene in a lamplit room with a bunch of guys sitting around eating hummus, thinking about what do we do about this guy telling the truth about us? We must make him stop talking. And there's always one guy with the bright idea, and I could just hear him say, I've got an idea, why don't we just kill him? That'll shut him up. That'll fix the problem.
Yeah, and I also think he thought he was being really funny, and I don't know if it was received in the way that he maybe thought it was landing. I will say Don Jr.'s was landing. People were laughing, people were clapping.
He did a pretty good, that was actually the first time I've ever heard him do an impression of his dad.
Don, you're getting a little aggressive on social media, Don. Relax.
I don't know if he's done that before.
I will say right before he did the impression, I had sent a message that was like, he's actually sounding more like Donald Trump than I've ever heard him sound. Yes. And then he flipped and he did the impression, and I was like, oh, I think he's just gearing up for it. But yeah, that like stole the show for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And honestly, in terms of like political through lines, I felt like if anything, that was kind of like an up and coming voice in a way. Like we obviously know who he is, but it felt like that was a way bigger presence than I've seen him take on stage before.
And it was a little less fire and brimstone than usual for Don Jr. On the other hand, then you had Stephen Miller, who was full blown, raining death from the skies.
And to those trying to incite violence against us, those trying to foment hatred against us, what do you have? You have nothing. You are nothing. You are wickedness, you are jealousy, you are envy, you are hatred. You are nothing.
I'm not sure his hit as well as he thought it did. It was almost kind of like a hard speech to really like interact with. It was sort of aggressive, I would classify it as, and like not really it was one of the least conversational ones,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, he's not a particularly good spokesperson for the administration, I don't think. So yeah, I mean, with the exceptions of sort of like the Stephen Miller, Lord Voldemort thing, and Tucker Carlson sort of going off the reservation, the main event itself and all of the speakers, I thought it was really remarkably done and profound, and did this man a great, it was a great memorial. It was a great service, and it's hard to say anything other than that. I'm just curious, was that the same vibe that you got? What else?
Yes, 100%. We spoke with a couple of people that were like drawn to tears thinking about Charlie being gone, and like when we ask people his legacy, there's no one, like absolutely everyone answers right away, and there's a handful of things. One is really faith, and bringing faith also to the front of politics was really big for a lot of people. Two is just like youth activism and really just like activating voters and being able to say what you want. And three, which is really interesting in this age, is free speech. And that came through also with Tulsi Gabbard's speech. That was interesting because not a lot of them touched as much on free speech as I thought they were going to, and hers was a bit like one of the more direct ones.
And then did I catch, was that Trump at the end talking about, did he make a Jimmy Kimmel reference?
He did. Trump mentioned Kimmel in a brief sort of part at the end about him, like not having great ratings and sort of getting taken off. But free speech was mentioned a couple times throughout it. It was not as much at the forefront as I had thought. It came through mainly in sort of like, there should be no political violence of someone who is openly debating, someone like Charlie. But Tulsi Gabbard was the one that really touched on like the importance of free speech and how Charlie Kirk he was quote unquote armed with the Constitution rather than anything else. And she was really like using that to talk about it. But Kimmel didn't really come up in any other parts of the speeches, I would say. It was really primarily focused on faith and Kirk's activism and his legacy. Everyone basically acknowledged he has extraordinarily huge shoes to fill that will never be filled. But however, he has sort of created these other people that are now empowered to sort of help lead his mission, but they won't replace him.
Yeah, and I do think that Erica Kirk, to the extent that she would, she wants this job, it's she's certainly become sort of a public figure overnight and a remarkable speaker. I had never actually really heard her speak at length until today, and I thought that she really just did a wonderful job.
Erica is loved by the crowd. Everyone I asked, also across genders, like everyone is like, she is brilliant. She was an amazing partner to Charlie. Like, she knows this better than everyone. Something that's interesting is that Charlie has said, and a lot of people repeated this, that she's more conservative than him. And a lot of people were excited by that. They were like, we can't wait to see what she's going to put forward with this. And she was like resounding. Everyone was like very team Erica for this.
Okay, Mandy, thank you for spending your weekend with us here on the 1600, yes. And we will talk to you later. My thanks again to Mandy Taheri for going out to cover that very important memorial over the weekend. Some final thoughts here. Of all the stories that I've covered here at Newsweek, this one has really been the most fraught. I mean, I get emails all day long from readers on both the left and right. They yell at me in sort of equal measure, which I sort of take some amount of pride in. But emotions are very clearly raw right now. They're raw out there. People are hurting. People are upset. People are angry. You don't have to really agree with Kirk politically, or even, you really don't even have to believe that he was acting in good faith. But you still have to understand how bad his assassination is going to be for our already frayed politics, right? Say what you will about him, but he was out there in the public square, literally, day in, day out, making his case with words, not with violence. Again, words, not violence. That's really important. He single-handedly got millions of young Americans, in particular young men, right? People who are sort of politically apathetic, who have not been involved in politics. He got them interested. He got them interested in both politics, elections. Also, he made conservatism cool in a way that no other figure in my lifetime has ever been able to do. Republicans have always been trying to get young people on the board, and it's never really worked, whether it's been Mitt Romney, John McCain, Bob Dole. Like, it wasn't really until Trump and then Kirk that they were really able to turn this into a movement for the young. Now, for him to be silenced for his views in such a horrific fashion, right? Again, in front of his family, in front of thousands of college kids who looked up to him, right? Imagine how traumatized those people are going to be. This really was a 9/11 type event in an already tumultuous political moment. And it's going to have consequences that we really have not even begun to see here, even 10, 11 days out. Okay, on behalf of all of us here at Newsweek, thank you for watching and listening to this edition of the 1600. Once again, you can sign up to the newsletter here. And in the meantime, be good to each other and be good to yourselves.